funny is a lot of times I get comments from people saying, "Detective, you are so cool." And you know what I tell them? No, I'm not cool. These new wallets from Exter are what's cool. The slim design, fiber carbon is just one of the many options that you have. Aluminum cased. I mean, look at this thing. With one click of a button, access to all your credit cards, bank cards, driver's license. And you know what the best part of it is? It's trackable. No more losing your wallet. It's solar powered that you can track this thing on your phone. There's an app that you download that you track it. They look great. I am switching right now from my old standard billfold to these new wallets. You bet I am. You know why? Because they are cool. Get yourself one at Exter.com. Make sure you use my code UnsolvedNoMore to get up to 40% off on these new Exter wallets. Okay, we're back with Bill Noguera. We're going to talk today about a serial offender named Rodney Alcala, who was nicknamed the dating game killer. Bill had the opportunity to observe Rodney, and the basis of this episode is really going to be what Bill learned from Rodney and what he can tell us. He's going to give us a little bit of a background on Rodney's crimes, but they're so in depth and they're so many that you could go back and look, yourself, research it a little bit. But right now we want the inside scoop, because everybody knows about the dating game and stuff like that. But what I want to know, and I think what you guys want to know, is how was Rodney Alcala inside San Quentin prison, and if there's any stories that Bill can tell and share about his experience with Rodney inside those prison walls. So with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, Rodney, and like he liked to say, Alcala. He didn't like to be called Alcala for some reason. He was Alcala. And yeah, he's known as a dating game killer because in 1978 he appeared actually on the television show, and he actually won the show. But this guy, that's what everybody knows. This guy is, in my opinion, the most interesting of all the insects that I know. And I always call serial killers insects because, like a kid, I like to look at them, probe them, throw things at them to see how they respond. And with this guy, the first thing you should know is that he is the most intelligent of all the serial killers. 170 IQ, which is genius. This guy, his crime spree that people know about ran between 1968 and 1979. He killed in Washington, California, New York, Wyoming, and those are only the cases that people know about. He is prolific. And a couple episodes again, Ken and I really talked about this ultimate serial killer. And we touched on that possibly Kohlberger was one of those new types. He was going to school, he understood forensics, he understood everything about the collection of the forensic evidence, and yet he made all these mistakes. Rodney Alcala is different. He crossed all these different barriers that serial killers never cross. For example, in 1968, when his career supposedly started, and we don't know where it started, this is the one that people know about because he picked up an 8-year-old child, picked her up, convinced her to get in the car with him, and he took her to his home, where a witness happened to have seen that and called the police. They arrived a few minutes later, and when they knock on the door, a half-naked Rodney Alcala answers the door. And he said, "Look, I'm just taking a shower. Give me a moment, I'll be out." While he did that, he closed the door. About 10, 15 seconds later, the police started getting, something's going on here. Something's wrong. They kick the door down. They find the child on the kitchen floor, half beaten to death, raped, and he's nowhere to be seen. He runs out the back door. I think that's one of the reasons that law enforcement always, when someone says, "Hold on a minute," they send their partner to the back door to wait for someone to come out the back door. They didn't do that in this situation. They were in Los Angeles, and he skips town. And no one hears from him. But the child was gravely harmed. She was almost dead. He would have killed her. And so Rodney Alcala still know he went to New York, started living under the name of John Berger. He became an FBI #1 suspect, or top 10 most wanted. A couple of kids had identified him, and they brought him to California. He only did about 2 years for that crime because the parents of that child refused to testify. What's really not known, because the story continues, is that while he was in New York, he murdered a number of women while he was there. He was already a very well-known serial killer. His victims were found in 1977. They were found in 1976. There is a lot of cases, in cold cases, he is associated with. They found...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
They found more than 1,000 photographs of children and women in sexually explicit positions in his resumes. When they found his locker, they opened it. He was an Army clerk. 1964, he had a nervous breakdown. But all through this, he's very intelligent. He graduates from UCLA's Fine School of Arts. He studies under Roman Polanski. He then goes to New York University, studies art there. This guy is a chameleon, because what we see is he's killing children. He is sexually attracted to them, but in the same token, he's killing women. He actually, he killed Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin's goddaughter. He killed her as well. She's one of his victims.
Wow. Well, it's very coincidental that you said chameleon, because I had that exact same thing written down here when I did my research on this guy, and I have it circled because just looking at photographs, and I'm just going off photographs of the guy, and mostly when he was in prison, how much he changed his looks. It looked like continuously.
Yes, you're absolutely right. He wears mustache, he wears beard, he cuts his hair, he wears it long. He's very well spoken. He is the perfect chameleon. And it's one of the things that how they introduced him in the dating game. Listen to this. This is how they introduced him when he was a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in a darkroom at age 13, fully developed. Wow. Between takes, you might find him skydiving or motorcycling. That's how they introduced him in a dating game. And he was so well spoken that he got the young woman to pick him as the bachelor she was going to go out with. But get this, she got so creeped out by him when she actually got to speak to him that she declined the date. And I actually asked him about that. This is something no one's ever done. So let me give you a little bit of background, Ken. As you know, I am a contemporary artist who is represented by galleries worldwide. And it's not a hidden, secret on death row that I am an artist. Rodney Alcala approached me very early on because of that fact. He wanted to know how I got into galleries. He wanted to know, because he's a photographer, he wanted to know how I got my drawings to look like photographs. And that's how our conversation started. It was about art. He is actually a graduate of UCLA's School of Art. This guy's no dummy. So one of the things that it was a commonality for him, that he was able to bridge that with me being a serial killer, and I'm not, is the fact that he found interest in my art and then wanted to speak about art. This has happened more than once, as you know, with some of these serial killers who are photographers or wannabe artists, and they want to rub shoulders with someone that's already made it in that world. This is what happened with Rodney Alcala, and I asked him about that particular instance on the dating game. And the question was, this is one thing I started talking about art. I said, you won the dating game. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I mean, you're a good-looking guy. You're in great shape. How did you do it? I mean, it's hard to get someone to like you, and even more difficult to get them to go out with you when you have other guys competing with you and they can't see what you look like. And he said, yeah, man, she was the one that got away because, man, the things I was going to do to her, she just didn't understand who was standing in front of her. And I go, what do you mean, who was standing? He goes, look, he goes, I know what I am. She didn't know. Something tipped her off to what I had intended for her. And then I said, well, what do you have intended for her? He goes, oh, man, I would have posed her. I would have taken photographs. I would have strangled her. I would have revived her. I would have strangled her again. I would have revived her. And I would have done things that only you can imagine. And he chuckled. And then he said, look, I'll get back to you. He put on the craziest little hat with little straps on the side, and he started running around the yard because he was on yard 4, which is the protective custody yard, which was right next to my yard. And he would run like 300 laps, which is about 15 miles a day, every day. He never stopped. He wore those little dolphin shorts, like like women wore in the 80s, with a small little tank top. He looked like the fruitiest guy in the world running. This guy would run like 15 miles a day.
Wow. It's crazy. How long did you know him there?
Well, I met him in 1987. He was going to trial at the same time that I was going to trial in Orange County. And I was associated with him. I interviewed him close to probably 120 times in the time that he and I knew each other. And in that time, so in time frames, we're talking about 30 years.
And so when you say interview him, I mean, he doesn't know that, right? It's more of just talking to him about certain aspects maybe of his crime and his background?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not telling him I'm interviewing him. I'm talking to him, getting him to talk, and always that bridge was art. He always was interested. You know, it's very difficult to pull one of these guys over and say, hey, man, what did you do? Or that's not how you do it. Sometimes it's you show them a photograph, or you know what they're interested in, and you tell them, look, would you like to, I know someone's got a photograph like this, I can get it for you. They become very interested. So with him, it was always art.
Right.
If I said, look, I'm having a show next week, this is the flyer for the show, this are the cards, the invitations, he would love to see me. He'd always ask me, may I have one of your invitations? May I have it? I said, of course you can. But that was my way of interviewing him and getting him to talk.
So it seems to me, just off of this brief conversation that we're having, that he was more quote-unquote likable than the other guys that you've talked about in there, the other serial offenders?
Yes, because he was so intelligent. You can have a very high-level conversation with him on any subject. He was very well-read, very well-spoken, but as he got older, he could not help his being eccentric. And we see this during his last trial. Look, I told you how intelligent this guy was. He got 3 reversals. Remember, they convicted him dead bang. They had him. And he beat the cases 3 different times on appeal and went back to trial. The last trial that he went back to, he put on a performance that was very Ted Bundy-like. Very creepy. When he has to, of course, he plays his own lawyer, he has to interview himself somehow. Normally, a defendant will get on the stand and his attorney will cross-examine him. He decided not to do that. He decided to interview himself, that he was not on the witness stand, but he would change his voice. Like he'd say something to the effect of, Mr. Alcala, on this date, did you drive your car to the beach? And then he would answer the question in a different voice. It was one of the creepiest things in the world, but that is where his brain began. His high IQ, him being...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have 60 seconds remaining.
Began really to change, and it just became creepy at that point.
Wow. Okay, let's continue this in the next call.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and continue. Well, before you do, let me throw this at you because you brought it up. I have written down here also a big, in capital letters, like Bundy. And you brought up something about a trial, how he acted sort of like Bundy. But I see a lot of similarities in a lot of the things he did, particularly, and I doubt this was on purpose, but with his IQ, maybe it was. is murdering across state lines in different jurisdictions, which is what Bundy did, and it made it very difficult for law enforcement to get together and share that information. What do you think about that?
Exactly. It's not only because of his IQ, but his hunting ground was very widespread. As you know, Bundy went from Colorado to Florida. He went to different states. Same thing, Washington as well. With Alcala, it's the same thing. Los Angeles is hunting ground, Orange County, Wyoming. He keeps crossing. And yes, in those days, the 1970s, it was virtually impossible because law enforcement didn't share information. These guys kept killing. And because they didn't share information, there was a huge pissing contest. These guys got along, and they were able to do so much more than they would have if they had today's system in place where everybody crosses lines. There's that data bank where all law enforcement share information and they compare. This is good police work. Of course, in those days, things are a little bit different. He's very much like Bundy. The brutality of his murders are also Bundy-like. Remember, this guy is killing actually before Bundy. Rodney Alcala started in 1968 that we know of, and that was with the rape and attempted murder of that child, which he would have murdered had the police not come to that door because someone witnessed something weird. And I've always said, if you see something, write down the plates and call. If you're wrong, no harm done. Hey, I'm sorry, we were mistaken. But if it's true, you could save a life. This is a perfect example of a person seeing something happening in 1968, calls the police, and saves that child's life. But I don't believe that's Rodney Alcala's first molestation or attempted murder or murder of a child. He usually likes to abduct a child. He doesn't really kill them where they're at. He takes them somewhere else. So it's very easy for him to kill and discard the body, like he did in other cases. In New York, he discarded bodies in canyons. He left them next to rocks. Sometimes left them in apartments, in laundromats. This guy had a very wide range, and this is why I continue to emphasize that he is the prototype of the ultimate serial killer that I've spoken about. Highly accurate, high IQ. He crosses sexual lines, children, women, young boys. He is a chameleon. He goes on national TV. He wins. He works for he actually at one point worked for the Los Angeles Times. He's doing all of these things, and he's not getting, he's getting caught because he doesn't, in those days there was no DNA, so he wasn't worried about it. Had he known and was familiar with the technologies of evidence collecting that there is now, he would have evolved. He would have been able to do things that I talk about, crossing sexual gender lines, crossing age lines, crossing racial lines, because his victim really wasn't important. What was important is his gratification. He is able to sexualize the act of killing, which is also very rare. He strangles a woman, but he revives her, so he can do it again. So you see how I'm explaining the control factor, sexualization of murder. That is very rare in a serial killer when he can sexualize different parts of the act itself to receive gratification from each part of the act.
Yeah, and that's very important. And another important aspect I want to bring up that links him to just about every serial killer that we have talked about and many others is the fact that he took souvenirs as well. At least one of the girl's earrings that he had in a storage unit. Are you familiar with that at all?
I am. Yes, that's exactly right. He did take souvenirs, and that particular girl that he took the earrings from, I believe was an Orange County girl, and they convicted him because her mother was able to identify those earrings in his locker. In that same locker, they found over 1,000 photographs of sexually explicit photographs of children, boys and girls, as well as women. He fancied himself a fashion model. So this guy was everywhere.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
You've also mentioned his appearance. He changed his appearance so much, it's very difficult to recognize him. He's very pale in the wintertime. He becomes extremely dark in the summertime. He wears his hair long. He wears it short. He wears mustache. He wears beards. This guy, had he known what Kohlberger knew, this guy would be extremely difficult to catch. And I tell you, Ken, he and I had a lot of conversations where I was thinking the same thing. Like, wow, had this guy been able to curtail his gratification and control himself a little bit more, as I say, he's a prototype, he would have been impossible to catch. And we see this now. So listen to this. He gets convicted in 1979. Arrested. He's convicted in 1980-something. But in 2010, murders are linked to him. 2004, 4 more murders are linked to him by DNA. Jill Barkup, 18. Georgia Witz, 27, in Malibu. Charlotte Lamb, raped and strangled in El Segundo, California. She was 31. Jill Parrington, 21, found in Burbank. They were all posed. He actually began to change his signature. He began to pose to women in sexually explicit positions. He began to change his MO. So this, as he was a chameleon in his appearance, his murders also changed as time went along. So that's 2004. In 2016, he's charged another murder. So in 2019, again, charges more. This guy was prolific, and there are a number of murders out there that have never been able to be solved. They're cold cases because they couldn't attribute it to him. He talked about this with me numbers of times of how many women he killed. And I asked him, look, everybody talks about, I have 100 kills. Law enforcement loves to brag about, well, this guy's the worst killer of all. They say it every time. He's the most prolific killer in the world. He do a smile. He says, yeah, that's the difference between fact and fiction. And I say, well, what's your number? He never answered my question for the first 10 years. After we started talking more and more, I asked him point blank, Rodney, I know you're intelligent. You're obviously a graduate in college. You can go anywhere you want. Good-looking guy. You're in great shape. I was playing to his ego, and I said, but look, we've talked for years, and I've told you about what I did. What is your number? How many kills do you really have? And he just got quiet, and he said, it's upwards of 60. I said, okay, well, everybody says 60, 70, 80. So he said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll give you a specific number. I said, okay. He says, I killed 73 people. I said, okay. And he said, and then he named Jill, Gloria, Charlotte, the other Jill. He named the young lady in New York.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
And then he brought out a list to me. I brought out for him a list of all my shows, and I was bragging. I was playing a psychological game with him. I figured I could get him to do it if I just teased him and I baited him. So one day I brought out a list of all the shows I've had, and I brought flyers, and I brought out everything else to prove that I've had these shows, the Louvre in Paris, France, the shows in the Link Gallery, Elder Gallery, all these galleries I've shown at, different films that have been done by my work, and I showed them to him. And he says, man, you got 15 shows here? I said, yeah. And he says, you're proud of that? I said, absolutely. He goes, well, check out my work. And he brought out a list, and he put it against the fence. I couldn't touch it because we were talking in between fence. He was on yard 4, I was on the 88 yard as a worker there, as the care provider, so we would talk at the fence. And he put the list across thing. On that list, a piece of paper has something like 31 or 32 lines. He had 2.5 rows of names, and he had dates all the way across them. And he showed it to me, and he laughed, and he said, you're still an amateur. I'm the pro. And I just said, very nice.
Were you able to see any? Were they just random people's names, or
Sure.
yeah?
Yeah, I couldn't. I didn't know who the women were. There was, Julianne Roberts. That was a name that popped. That I saw. I could see, but it was so quick. It was. I had another name, Cassandra Wesson. Another name below that was it was a Spanish name, Gloria Cenis. But he wrote them in handwriting, so I could look at the names, but I really couldn't see them. So I said, "Well, is that your kill count?" He goes, "That's my kill list." And he was serious as a heart attack. So over the years, he would bring photographs out. He was very proud of his photographs, and they were all of women, different poses, children as well, young girls. It's very difficult for a guy like me to look at that, but I was trying to get under his skin. I wanted to see who was behind that mask, because he's very good at what he does. He's even more intelligent than Ted Bundy. He's more intelligent than Ed Kemper, and he's more intelligent than Randy Kraft, the scorecard killer. This guy, and I'm even willing to bet he held some back, because this guy, he is a predator. But a predator with no limits. He doesn't have a type. He doesn't have a sexual preference. Everything works for him because he has that one tick that I've never seen before. The ability to sexualize different people, different age groups, which we've seen Richard Ramirez do it, but then also sexualize the act of killing, which was to kill, bring back to life. Kill, bring back to life. These are things he liked to do while he was still inside the women. It's horrible to say that, but this is what he told me. I know the audience wants to hear what this guy was about. That's what this guy was about. He was a monster.
Wow. So all those photographs that they found in his storage unit or whatever, you feel, as I do, I mean, there's victims on those photographs that we don't know about, and only Rodney probably knows.
Correct. But there was, law enforcement did solve one, and in that stack of 1,000 pictures, they were able to connect one girl, one young woman, to those photographs. One of the photographs, or several of the photographs, were about a girl that was found murdered, and that murder was attributed to him, and he was ultimately charged for that murder.
Yeah.
So,
was
according
that,
to him,
was
those
that,
photographs are accurate, and they are victims.
and that one girl that was identified, that was a Wyoming girl, right?
That was one of them, yes.
Okay.
And he killed her in Wyoming, and that wasn't attributed to him until years later, yes.
So if there's photographs of 1,000 girls, or boys, women, children, are there legitimate photographs there? For what purpose are they? You know what I mean? If they are not his victims, because he doesn't have 1,000 of them that we know
You
of.
have 60 seconds remaining.
But could they be of legitimate purpose?
I believe so. I believe they are also trophies. He may not have killed them, all of them. Of course he didn't. But he had the opportunity. And the opportunity, if he's able to sexualize that as well, that's a biggie for him. He kept those photographs for, he's part of his own work as well. That he photographed these people. But there are victims in those photographs, and we know that because at least one has been solved.
Okay.
And I'll be calling back, but as you know, law enforcement, after they put someone in prison, they don't really look into them too much more.
Right.
Unless it happens to hit a DNA hit.
Right. Okay. I'll hear you in a minute. Okay, so this is what I'm getting off of what you just said. It's possible. Let's say that Rodney photographed 1,000 girls. For him, if he can control that tick, as you say, and that desire to not kill, maybe because something wasn't right. Maybe he has her in the apartment and he's photographing her, but the neighbors are home. Or just something ain't right, so he can control that and he lets her leave, where in other cases she would have been a victim. But now he has that photograph and now he can masturbate. He can relive what he could have done to her the whole time. Is that a good way to think about it?
That's a perfect way to look at it. That's exactly what he was doing. There's no doubt. These are potential victims, and as we've seen it before. Look, we just talked about Lawrence Bittaker. They did trial runs, 20 girls in the car. They could have killed them. They didn't. They left them in the car and they let them go. They were doing trial runs. As I mentioned before, 1968 is the first time he appears, and he's almost caught. I don't think that's his first time. You just don't one day suddenly pick up an 8-year-old child and take her to your apartment because that's what you just had to do one day. You have to work your way up to it. And he already had an MO. He already had a signature. Pick up the young girl, take her to the apartment, sexually assault them, try and kill them, or to kill them. He didn't do it that particular time because someone called in. We see it throughout his career. He was arrested again in 1973 for assaulting a 13-year-old child. He gets out in like 8 months. He's arrested again in 1974 for assaulting another child. He's released again in 1976. And here's the crazy part, Ken. In 1977, he asked his parole officer if he could be allowed to go to New York. And his parole officer let him. What does he do when he's there? Well, he murders Elaine Hoover, who is the goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Samos Jr. So this guy didn't have boundaries. He outsmarted people. And look, even at the very end, he wrote a book that he self-published called You, the Jury. That's what the book was called. I don't know how well it did. I didn't read the book. I didn't think that he was going to tell me anything in that book that he hadn't shared with me on the yard. But this guy, for all intended purposes, he would be the prototype for the guy I've been hunting and talking about, which is the ultimate serial killer.
So if people look at those 1,000 photographs, I mean, that's a lot of photographs.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
And if he was convicted of 5 murders, I think, but he's connected to positively to 8 from what I researched, and he's saying 73. So there's 60 plus women in those photographs that probably are legitimate victims, and they're somewhere. Body hasn't been recovered, or recovered and DNA hasn't been done. That's my thoughts on it. What are yours?
That's exactly right. And there's a lot of cases in places like Wyoming, Kentucky, where he could have been, and he left the body out in the elements. The young woman in Wyoming was left out in the elements.
Right.
She was left out. I believe it was the desert. So it's very easy for a body to go unnoticed in the desert. By the time they find it, the DNA it's gone. It's been completely destroyed. So it's very possible. And from what he said, and from the photographs, and then later on, they do in fact solve a case because of the photographs that he had. It really does raise the eyebrow, and that he does have several more murders that were never been discovered. I mean, he was connected to murders in San Francisco as well, and he was never charged till 2000. It was 2019 with that case, and he was already dying. So, law enforcement sometimes, when you have a killer in prison, he's not going to go anywhere. Why open the case? Why look at his DNA? And there's also agencies in the United States that don't have the money to get every case that they have and run the DNA through CODIS. They just don't have the money and the man hours. So they go unsolved.
Right, and I always tell people, hey, just because the case is cold, it does not mean that it's not solved. And I'm going to say as high as 75% of unsolved cases, the police know or have a good indication of who that murderer is. They just can't prove it. As Denzel Washington said in Training Day, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And I'm sure that Rodney has a lot of that in his cases and his victims.
Oh, absolutely. And look, this is one of the things, and he used to get a kick out of this, and this is pure narcissism. So when he went on a dating game, he told me, what better gratification than to go on national TV where the entire world sees me. They see me win. that. He didn't use the word serial killer. He didn't use that word. He said that he was seen, and during that time, after and before that time, I was already, and again, I'm quoting him, this isn't my word. He says, I was already a cleaner. That's his word, cleaner. I don't know. He never explained what that word meant to me, but he said a cleaner. And it's true. When he went on that show, Ken, he already had several murders on his jacket. He was already a murderer. We know he's an attempted murderer. He was a pedophile. He had been in prison a number of times for pedophilia, as well as assault on women. This guy was the real deal. And he went on that show, and he got the ultimate high by exposing his face to the whole world, and no one knew what he was.
Well, let me ask you a question that I guarantee my audience, every one of them, is probably wanting me to ask right now. They're all sitting at their screen saying, ask it, Ken. It is this. If Rodney was so smart, just like Brian Koberger, how the hell did he get caught?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. He's a prototype. He is a serial killer. The thing about Rodney Alcala is that he, as brilliant as he was, he could not control that tick. He had to kill. And he liked to pose. So there were some deficiencies in his MO. There were deficiencies in his way of thinking. He couldn't just kill, make the body disappear. First of all, because he didn't know that DNA was going to be invented. But he had to pose the body. He had to leave him in a position so everybody could see his work. That was his biggest problem. That he couldn't control the tick. And that is the difference between the serial killer we've seen in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and the one that I talk about that exists. That one can control his tick. He can control his instinct to kill. And he has somehow changed the gratification so he gets it from not getting caught. He doesn't need a crime scene because he has his own crime scene. He doesn't need the body to be seen because he sees it. He is able to evolve. Rodney Alcala had all the makings of that guy, but ultimately, at the end, he couldn't control his instinct. And that instinct was the instinct he was born with, which was to kill. People are born pedophilias. People are born this way. Whoever argues differently, I understand what they're talking about, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about. I've spent 40 years with these guys, and I know what they are. I see them, I talk to them, and they tell me about this instinct that they can't control it. It is there. It's like a person who can't stop eating, or it's like a person's a kleptomaniac. He can't control it. When you find a guy that can't control it, you have a very dangerous predator.
And it seems like he was on the way that it was possible he could control it because he's taken those photographs and not killing those people. So I think he was on the way of working on that, being able to control that. And thank goodness he was, arrested and caught. Or maybe he would have had full control over that, and then we would have had a big problem.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And luckily for the public, he was arrested, placed in prison, and unfortunately later on, a number of murders were attributed to him, and he was actually convicted of them. He actually decided not to go to New York because they had more cases there on him, and he just said, yeah, okay, I'll cop to him, just I don't want to go there, I want to stay where I'm at. But, yeah, you're right. We're lucky that he was arrested, placed in prison, never allowed out, and he died. He actually died in prison. He died at, I believe it was the Corcoran Medical Unit a couple years ago from natural causes.
Was he a target like Ramirez was when he got there?
Well, he went directly to a protective custody yard. He was not an idiot. He knew that had he gone on to a death row normal yard, they would have killed him. It wouldn't have even taken minutes. They would have jumped him. They would have immediately stabbed him. Rodney Alcala went to a protective custody yard the moment he stepped on death row. Actually, when he was in the county jail, he had already checked into protective custody.
Now, is that by his doing? Does he say that, hey, I want that, or is that the system?
Well, no, it's the system, but he also wanted it. Some serial killers don't. They try to go on the mainland and they get, well, like Richard Ramirez, they get stabbed. But Rodney Alcala knew what he was. He knew how other prisoners responded to that type of person because, remember, he had done time in prison before. He had done time in the California Department of Corrections in the early 70s, mid-70s, and he knew how convicts thought of him or of that type. So, he would have been killed.
Did he hang around other serial offenders, or was he more of a loner?
He was more of a loner. He did a lot of running. He didn't do a lot of talking. The person he talked to the most was me because of the art connection. He loved to see my work. I would give him my portfolios. He would take them with him. I really wanted this guy to trust me. I really wanted him to speak to me, and it took decades. This didn't happen overnight. And this is no, shot at law enforcement. But law enforcement has a very limited time. They're investigating a case. They have got an interview room. Tempers flare. It's very difficult to get these guys to tell you what you.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
To get them to tell you what you know is true, and they hold all the cards. I had decades to be able to wiggle into a position because of my art, because he trusted me, and because I shared my art for him, he would share with me.
So was he respected in the prison, or was he just like an afterthought, or what was your opinion on that?
In terms of a photographer?
No, as a person.
Well, not many people spoke to him in prison. He was, like I said, he ran most of the time in the yard. He spent 2 or 3 hours every day running. He would shower, he would sit and just read. He was by himself. I don't think people had too much of an opinion of him. Now, if you would have asked anybody in the yards that I was on what they thought of him, oh my God, they call him a fruit basket. The guy with the little tight shorts on, I'd like to slit his throat and that kind of stuff. The guys in the yards here, when they see him running, it looked like a bunch of dogs watching a rabbit running around in a circle. They wanted him.
Wow, interesting. Well, do you have any other interesting stories about Rodney that you can share that these guys would find interesting?
Only this one, and this is it's a little bit out there, but the only other person that Rodney Alcala spent a lot of time talking to that I saw was this transgender person that was on death row. Its name or her name, I don't know what's the politically correct way of saying it, was Jan or Jane. And Rodney spent a lot of time talking, I'm going to say her, I hope that's correct, and she ended up dying of AIDS here. She contracted AIDS while she was on the street, and then her or him and Rodney spent a lot of time talking. And I watched them because
you have 60 seconds remaining.
I was right next to them, and they did speak a lot. Don't know, I didn't really get too close to Jen at all. I didn't speak to her or him. I said hello when Rodney was there to try and get Rodney away from her or him, and just really basically talk to him.
Interesting. All right, you want to call back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, let's finish up with Rodney and give your summation of him now that he is deceased and he can no longer pollute our streets and have to watch our kids because of him. What did you think of him, and what in terms of a person, and what did you think of him in terms of a serial offender?
Well, I can't distinguish one from the other. As a person, if I didn't know who he was, obviously, intelligent, narcissistic, sociopath, psychopath, all those things are in an assessment of him. Very well-spoken, a person who can mimic other people. He can also blend in and change his appearance on a drop of a dime. So those are his traits as a person. As a serial killer, extremely interesting. One of the most interesting serial killers I've ever met because of his intelligence, his IQ, his ability to not only sexualize every aspect of his crime, but also control his crime and control himself to a certain degree. Obviously, he I would have had more time to interview him more. I wish I would have been in the same yard with him so I could have actually sat down and really compared notes with him. With a fence between us, sometimes it was hard. But yeah, this guy, really interesting. Probably one of very few serial killers that could change his taste in victim from one day to the next.
Right.
And at the same time receive gratification on all levels. So very interesting person. But look, one phrase to describe him as a person, it's a piece of garbage. I mean, come on. The truth is, yeah, he's interesting in a point of view of a person who studies him, but as a man or as a person, he's a piece of garbage. And you and I probably completely agree on that.
Right, absolutely. Okay, that's it for Rodney. Now, how does... listen, I don't care how he wants us to pronounce his last name. Fuck him. I'm going to say Rodney Alcala. And that's it for Rodney. That's it for Rodney Alcala.